Fox News alert now. President Trump is meeting with NATO leaders in Brussels, where he's already scored a big victory in NATO's commitment to fight the Islamic State savages. A short time ago, a moment for the history books. Our American commander-in-chief called out some members of NATO for not paying their fair share. And he spoke of the need to unite in the fight against terror. This is Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner. Here today, Sandra Smith, Meghan McCain, anchor of the Intelligence Report with Trish Regan on Fox Business, bringing us some intelligence, Trish herself. And today's hashtag One Lucky Guy, a couch first-timer, Fox News contributor, and former communications director for the DNC, Mo Elathi, is here. And Mo is also the founding executive director of Georgetown's Institute of Politics and Public Service. A man who is busy making time at the noon Eastern hour for us. Good to have you, Mo.
Thanks for having me. It's so exciting.
Yeah. There has not been a light news day in quite a while.
No, I'm exhausted just following the news. I'm not even in politics anymore, and I'm just exhausted all the time.
But the whole nation's in politics now.
Yeah, I know, right?
All right.
Know what? None of us are safe.
Okay. Grab a cup of coffee. We're ready. We're caffeinated. Right. Let's get started. President Trump is meeting for the first time with leaders of NATO. The alliance he once criticized is obsolete. And in what would be a diplomatic coup for the president, NATO is set to formally join the U.S.-led coalition against ISIS. Also in the wake of Monday's concert attack in Manchester, England, he invoked the shared fight against terror as he stood beside a newly unveiled NATO memorial made up of a piece of the Berlin Wall and a segment of the World Trade Center.
My travels and meetings have given me renewed hope that nations of many faiths can unite to defeat terrorism, a common threat to all of humanity. Terrorism must be stopped in its tracks, or the horror you saw in Manchester and so many other places will continue forever.
White House correspondent Kevin Corke joins us now live from NATO headquarters in Brussels. I just have to start with this, Kevin, because you and I talk about the color and the texture of events all the time. 28 members gathered, right? They're going to be at the table right now. They were stunned in silence, perhaps, when the president talked so bluntly about the 23 of the 28 who need to pay up.
Yeah, and you're right. And I can actually add one. Montenegro, as you know, soon to be making it 29 NATO members. But listen, when it comes to delivering a message straightforward and in a very strong and I would just say crystal clear manner, I think the President of the United States is pretty good at it. And let me just sum it up for you in just a couple words, Harris. Pay up. That was a message loud and clear delivered by the president to the other members of NATO. Listen, you're supposed to be contributing 2% of your GDP toward the collective defense of this alliance. But unfortunately, as you pointed out, the vast majority of countries simply aren't doing that. And the president made it clear today he's calling on everyone to pay their fair share.
23 of the 28 member nations are still not paying what they should be paying and what they are supposed to be paying for their defense. This is not fair to the people and taxpayers of the United States.
Not fair and not going to happen anymore. In fact, most NATO nations saying during this very brief summit that, yes, in fact, they will increase their contributions, and they have a timeline. They're trying to get up to 2% across the board by 2024. We'll see if, in fact, that turns out to be the case. And because I know you're wondering, okay, what are the 5 nations that right now are making that 2% mark? The U.S., the U.K., Poland, Estonia, and Greece. Thank you for asking. Back to you, my favorite.
You're not
Minnesota
allowed to read my mind. It's just not allowed. Well, it was really interesting to see. I would love to have been a fly on the wall to hear what the conversation was behind those smiles that they were making. Kevin, thank you very much. All right, so this was really, Mo, a moment, as I said, for the history books, but for all around the world, no matter what the narrative is going on here on the U.S. soil, this was a driver today.
Yeah, it was an important moment for the president. I don't think anyone can deny that. And it's not a unique moment in the sense that every American president of the last several presidents have been calling on NATO members to pay their fair share. This was probably more directly than anyone has done that in the past. We'll see if it's successful or not.
All right, so ISIS and the coalition, a coup for the president if he gets it today.
Yeah, I think it's a look. Having more partners involved in the fight against ISIS is absolutely important. It's absolutely critical. What's interesting to me about this entire trip, particularly the European swing, is a lot of our European allies don't trust this administration. I'm glad the president is actually calling on NATO members to pay their fair share, just as I'm glad President Obama did as well. However, I think a lot of them are wondering whether or not this president is going to be there for them if things suddenly get tense in Europe, particularly with Russia. We heard the EU today, the head of the EU today say, I don't think we see eye to eye with the American president when it comes to Russia. That's going to be a concern moving forward.
You know, Megan, it's interesting because I don't remember it the way that you say that it happened with President Obama. I don't remember the, more than 24 leaders standing outside looking rather perplexed and uncomfortable as this president
and I did say this was more direct.
I don't remember that.
Because that didn't happen. This was more, this was more direct. But the president, the past several presidents had called on NATO. They didn't do it as directly as this.
So let's see if the directness does.
We'll see.
Megan?
I just don't think it's fair to say Europe doesn't trust us right now. This administration is in its absolute infancy. This is the first trip overseas that our president has made to Europe. Like many things with President Trump, he campaigns with a certain rhetoric, and he actually seems to be governing, a lot more moderately. I think it's incredibly fair to say, NATO, you have to pay off. If you're talking about Greece and Estonia, by the way, not exactly nations with robust economies that are helping bankroll NATO, then it's more than fair for him to do this. Where he got off base was when I think he was calling NATO obsolete. I don't think that's a fair thing to say. I think he's come to realize here, meeting with these people, that softened it. Yes, how important it is for us to maintain our, relationship with everyone in NATO. But I just don't think it's fair to sit here and say that Europe doesn't trust President Trump because, quite frankly, he hasn't been challenged yet in any capacity. And everything going on with Russia, I always find it ironic when any Democrat starts caring about Russia, because you guys really didn't care when President Obama was in power. Remember, it was a 1980s foreign policy, and he would give Putin more flexibility after the election. So anytime any Democrat wants to talk about Russia, you guys can take a back seat.
All right, so this has popped up on the left side of the screen. We haven't seen President Trump there, but we know that he is either in the room or getting to the room. He has a working dinner right now with those NATO leaders that we're talking about. Opening remarks by the Secretary General Stoltenberg, which is a little bit mirroring what we saw earlier today out underneath the awning of the venue there, the headquarters in Brussels. Such a beautiful day that we watched. The remainder of the dinner, after we get these kind of traditional photo opportunities, will be private and closed to the media. But as soon as the president stops, we may leave this picture up actually side by side until the president steps into the picture. That's probably a good thing.
You mentioned Stoltenberg, and important to point out that he's asking for these progress, these sort of report cards of where they are, saying, quote, this will be a new tool to ensure we keep up the momentum and live up to our commitments as far as progress that they're making there. But Mo, if I were to broaden this conversation out as this goes on and as President Trump meets for the first time with leaders of NATO and look at this trip broadly, he's got a little momentum here. Would you agree with that?
I think this has been one of the better stretches of his presidency. I don't think anybody can question that. I think being out of the country right now with everything that he's facing here at home has been, a good chance for him to sort of get out of the bunker that this White House has become, and a very unhealthy bunker.
Can he keep that momentum when he returns to Washington?
I think it's going to be hard to some extent, right? I think the second he steps back on American soil and the stories are dominated not by a conversation with NATO leaders, but by what's happening in the special investigation, what's happening with Comey's testimony, what's happening
I know that's what Democrats would want,
but what's happening with Republican infighting over health care on Capitol Hill, right? It's not just Democrats that are causing problems for him. It's his own White House and his own party in the Congress are causing trouble for him. It's going to be hard, I think, to sustain this once he gets back.
So, but Trish, does he get a little bit of a residual bounce from this, though? Can you imagine if he gets the agreement, a stronger coalition among the members of NATO for ISIS? If we see any of those 23 even signal that they might want to pay more, like a 2% of their GDP, might want to pay their
is required, right?
Share.
And it, by the way, is amazing that Greece is actually meeting the minimum requirement.
And Estonia.
While Germany is not. And Estonia,
tiny little Baltic state.
I think
beautiful place.
Yes, I mean, just,
Indeed. He gets some headwind, for sure. But let's not forget the tone in which we live right now, right? And the rhetoric that we see. And the reality is the left does not want to give him anything. So even if he sees success over there, it's going to be very hard for them to admit. Any success they see as like a zero-sum game, right? They don't want to give him anything because that means effectively they're losing something. So while yes, I think that analytically everybody can step back and say, yeah, you know, pretty good job, and some members of the left are willing to give him that credit, the majority, and we're talking, you know, the Chuck Schumers of the world, Nancy Pelosi, etc., they are not willing to give him an inch because it means something from themselves.
All right, so we've got the president now, center left of your screen. He's just walked into this working dinner with the members of NATO. He's had quite a busy day. He did meet earlier with the new president, Macron of France. So it's been interesting for him to kind of cross paths with some of the people who've been making huge news recently. And now they're all gathered in this room after a very blunt speech outside underneath the awning of the glass awning of the headquarters in Brussels there of NATO, and in a smaller working environment they're going to talk about some of the issues. Mo, what do you think will be some of the things that they will be challenged by today that they'll talk about?
Look, I think Russia is going to be just a big issue that faces the NATO members moving forward. A lot of the NATO members have been dealing with the same sort of Russian interference in their domestic politics. We saw them trying to do that in Germany and in France, what they tried to do here. And what they did to some extent here were their moves in the Baltics. Right? This is something that is, I think, going to be of huge concern to NATO members moving forward, along with ISIS and the rise of terrorism.
How do you think that a president who has made it so clear that he's basically, and he hasn't said this, but just his actions, he's pushing the reset button, Megan? I mean, and I'm curious to know how these countries, how does an Angela Merkel in this environment respond when she knows she has an immigration crisis right now?
Yeah, and if you're Angela Merkel, you are the last sort of global world leader of a time when extreme progressive politics had sort of taken over. And now we're seeing a shift more towards progressivism and populism in the same way of President Trump. And, you know, we've seen it, everything from Brexit and beyond. So I think what will be interesting is when it comes to Syrian refugees, especially in the refugee crisis raging. Obviously, she ushered in 1 million refugees into Germany, followed by, you know, an absolute rise in, you know, violence towards women to the point that they ran out of pepper spray in their country. So there are definite extreme ideological differences. Even we saw the Prime Minister of Canada right there. You know, he has a completely different perspective in his country. He basically has an open borders policy letting refugees in. So I actually anticipate that will come up as well.
All right. And just so everybody knows, I mean, we're going to monitor the pictures of this, and they're going to go into their private section of this working dinner. But just FYI, that's the Secretary General Stoltenberg, who spoke earlier today, first up, followed by some of the leaders, including our very own president. So, you know, Sandra, when we watch this, what I find compelling about it, too, is that you have leaders who have not really met this president before.
Yeah, and it was amazing to watch him walk into the room just there, as you said, walking past the leader of Canada. Saw Angela Merkel there, and having our president, President Trump, walk into that room, kind of just, hey, how you doing? Yeah. I mean, this is a monumental, historical moment for the country, for the world. This gathering that's happening right there, in a very fancy new environment, that building. So I don't know. This trip seems to be changing Donald Trump's presidency.
Did you catch what our president said, though, about that building with his remarks? He said, you know, he called on the 23 of the 28 to pay their fair share militarily, and then he said, and I didn't even ask how much this brand new building cost, and he said, I can only imagine because it's very beautiful. So very interesting. Okay, we're going to move on. Again, we'll watch this, we'll monitor it for news when they go into the private section of this working dinner at NATO's in Brussels with those 28 leaders of NATO there and our President Trump. We won't have cameras on it, but when it makes news, we'll bring it to you. Some important developments now to tell you about in the investigation of the Manchester concert bombing.
Lots of reaction from both sides of the aisle on Capitol Hill after the Congressional Budget Office releases its analysis of the Republican health care bill. The CBO claims the bill would lower government deficits and health care premiums. House Speaker Paul Ryan weighing in just a short time ago.
A new study that just came out yesterday from HHS saying premiums have doubled in America because of Obamacare. People can't afford this. And so what CBO just told us is the reforms that we put in this bill will help lower premiums. And so I'm very encouraged by that.
On the other hand, the CBO also claims the bill could leave up to 23 million people uninsured. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi playing up that side of the argument earlier. Watch.
Yesterday, the CBO confirmed what we all knew, but they made clear that many Americans with pre-existing conditions would face soaring costs and frightening limits on the care they need. Some people with pre-existing conditions, many of them, would no longer be able to afford coverage of any kind.
Of course, Mo, the argument about the CBOs, they haven't exactly gotten it right in the past, so why are they putting so much emphasis on this analysis?
Well, it's still the benchmark. It's still the important nonpartisan analysis, right? This is a political powder keg for Republicans right now. You've got the Republicans in the Senate saying, yeah, dead on arrival. We're not even looking at the House bill. We're going to start from scratch. And Mitch McConnell, who yesterday came out and said, I'm not sure we can get to 50 on health care. We want to get to tax reform. You've got Republican members. Remember, this thing only passed by 1 or 2 votes in the House. So you got a lot of members there who are freaking out over the fact that not just the 23 million number, but premiums going up for older Americans and likely for people with pre-existing conditions in huge chunks of the country, right? We can sit there and have this argument, but remember this plan is incredibly unpopular right now. And
okay, but you just said it's going to look completely different when it gets to the Senate.
But this is the argument, this is the political argument we're having right now. If the Senate can't pass anything, which it's saying it might not be able to do, this is what we're going to be debating.
Let's not jump to that conclusion. Trish, your thoughts?
Can I just point out something? You know, the current system is not working. Health insurers are not providing the insurance. And the reason is it makes no economic sense. Okay, in this particular case, I know that we're hearing from Nancy Pelosi and company, okay, it's going to cost the elderly more. Well, guess what? I'm sorry, it costs more to insure an older person than it does a 22-year-old. That's just the reality of it. And the insurance companies, they can't burden that cost. And by the way, they won't. They've made it clear over and over again by getting out of these states and getting out of the business, they're not going to do it. So you have to come up with something that makes economic sense.
All right, you said something, and I want to go back. You said Obamacare numbers are going up. What are you talking about?
I'm sorry, I'm talking about the polling numbers, right? I'm talking about in the public opinion polls. The Fox News poll that just came out the other day showed that it had flipped.
People always adhere to what is there rather than
No, it's because people are scared we're going to mess out the rollout. And I will give you that right now it is very messy. And it started out messy. Paul Ryan and the Freedom Caucus managed to screw this up so royally that, yes, we're having problems right now. That being said, I'm not an economic expert like you, Sandra, but I do know that the CBO has gotten many things wrong. I found this fascinating. This year, the CBO predicted that 26 million people would be on Obamacare exchanges. Do you know what it is? 10 million.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry if I don't necessarily think that this messy way of analyzing the tea leaves of what it's going to look like, the premise of Obamacare was a lie. People didn't buy into it. 16 million less people are on it. So why should the average American trust the CBO score right now?
And from the beginning, excuse me, just real quickly, from the beginning, I think Democrats are getting a little excited about this idea that there's contention among the Republicans. From the beginning, you had at least 2 people, if not more than that, a widening range of Republicans that really want to repeal this thing before you do anything else. Guys like Senator Ted Cruz and Rand Paul, they're against this not because they don't like what's in it, they don't like the premise of it. So as a Democrat, I would hope that people don't get too excited about the idea that there's still room for them to repeal this and to get a whole lot of Republicans on board because they don't want any of it.
That won't happen either.
But you're 100% right, though, that there are people like Rand Paul and Mike Lee who just want this repealed and don't care about the replacement in the same way. But we have a paradigm shift that Obama successfully did. He told the American people and has convinced them that health care is a right given to you by the government. So right now, trying to take away, it's the great conundrum we're in right now, trying to take away insurance from people that have already had it. Well, you're talking about, Mo, the hysteria that's going on in town halls across the country is because we haven't given them a good enough example of what we're going to replace it with. And that's bad politics on their part.
If the Republican Party moves to repeal without replace, that's going to to get so much
But Rand Paul has told
He's
me
not
personally
wrong.
that's not.
It doesn't.
It's not just Rand Paul's party. He's not. I'm sorry. Did we elect Rand Paul president?
And this is
No, I'm telling you what he said.
This is after 7
at least
years.
he's got a plan.
That's not
After
directed
7
at you.
years,
I'm
after
sorry.
7 years of talking about this and working towards it, the Republican Party has not yet coalesced around a singular answer.
No, but they do have a plan.
It also doesn't help that the media coverage of this in the wake of the CBO report. What is the headline you saw everywhere? 23 million will lose health coverage.
So where's the Republican messaging to press back on that?
Well, here's one point that's rather obvious. Of course, the number will go up because there are a lot of people that may opt out of it in this particular case. I mean, they don't have the penalties involved. It's not required that you have the insurance. So
it's not mandated.
Naturally, the number's going to go up.
Not the people on Medicare.
Again,
now.
where's the Republican? Yeah, where's the message on that?
I hear you, Harris. I think that, to Megan's point, they're fearful because now people have gotten used to something. They think it's a right to have health insurance. They're afraid to say, okay, we need to start over from scratch.
Which goes back to how I started this answer, which was this is a huge political powder keg for the Republican Party. They don't know how to handle it.
All right, you started with that, you're going to end with that. New chilling.
Fox News alert on the Manchester terror attack. We have now learned that Libyan authorities have arrested the father and two brothers of suspected bomber Salman al-Beidi. Al-Beidi had recently spent 3 weeks in Libya, returning to England just days before the attack, which killed 22 people, most of them girls under the age of 16, and left more than 100 needing medical treatment. 23 of those remain in critical care. Senior Foreign Affairs correspondent Greg Palcott is live in Manchester, England. Greg?
Harris, this day in Manchester drawing to a close, but we are still seeing passions felt, tears shed, flowers, messages, balloon left in the memorial behind me to those who were killed and injured in that horrendous attack here Monday night. And we're watching very closely, the police try to get to the bottom of this dastardly act. Overnight, there were arrests. Today, there were raids, all told. 8 people are in custody, believed connected to, in some way, this attack. We, in fact, have one official telling us that they think that they are getting to the bottom of the support network behind this vicious bombing. Now detained in Libya, the father and the brother of the attacker, Salman al-Beidi. They have associations with ISIS and al-Qaeda, but it's not clear how close they are. The attacker actually spent time immediately before his attack in Libya, and there are connections being looked at between him and terror figures in Germany, in France, and in Belgium. This has chilling images of the attacker surface on surveillance video at a shopping mall just a couple blocks from the attack site, just a couple days before that attack was made. And as a furor is breaking out about the leak of that information and other information coming from this investigation, British officials say that they are cutting off information to their counterparts in the U.S. and until this is straightened out. Take a listen to what the mayor of Manchester had to tell us today.
This is wrong morally, it's arrogant, but it's disrespectful to the people of Greater Manchester, but particularly to the families of those who lost loved ones and the injured. It must stop.
Finally, there was an emotional minute of silence here earlier today, marked here as well as across the UK, as more of the 22 dead are identified. 3 more teenagers were identified in the hospitals, 75, many of them children, some of them in critical care. Here's a bit of what the people who came to pay their respects here today had to say to us.
We can't be intimidated by these people. We've got to stand up and be strong, and Manchester is a strong city.
What did you feel when you first heard about the attack?
Felt sick, really shocked.
Felt sick?
Definitely, yeah. So it's nice to see everyone coming out and paying their respects, really.
I'm just worried for what's going to happen next and all the children. It's just so sad.
You just come to show your respects.
Now, the 14 kids in the children's hospital here recovering from this terrible attack got a very special visitor today, Harris. It was from the Queen. Remember, she's a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother. She called the attack wicked. Her action, very kind. Back to you.
Yeah, I just come back to that young woman's words, what happens with the children. God bless them. Greg, thank you.
President Trump asking his staff to line up more candidates to replace ousted FBI Director James Comey, amid word that former Senator Joe Lieberman is out due to a possible conflict of interest concern. The news comes a week after Mr. Trump confirmed Lieberman was a frontrunner. But Democrats had voiced concern about his political background and lack of federal law enforcement experience, despite the fact that he was Al Gore's running mate back in 2000. Senator John McCain slamming the Democrats, saying, quote, "My Democratic colleagues clearly did kill Lieberman's chances. This is their nominee for Vice President of the United States. If anything would make you cynical about this town, that's it." So, Mo, how do you explain that one?
I had the same problem with Joe Lieberman that I had when John Cornyn's name was being floated or Trey Gowdy's name was being floated. Given where we are right now and the heightened sensitivities we have to the role of the FBI, having someone who was not political, I don't care what party, Democrat, Republican, Independent, having someone who was not a politician, having someone who was a professional law enforcement official without political affiliations or baggage, I thought was the more prudent way to go.
All right, so let's talk names here because Attorney General Jeff Sessions has been interviewing candidates. We've talked about many of them on the couch here, Megan. Fran Townsend, you have shown support for. FBI Director Andrew McCabe, the acting FBI Director, I should say, and former Congressman FBI Special Agent Mike Rogers. Any particular name that you want to throw out there?
Well, you know, I love Fran Townsend, and I like the idea of having a really tough woman heading the FBI who is a very well-respected prosecutor, worked in counterterrorism in the Bush administration. Maybe it's too political for Democrats, but it is a really sad day for me when people like Chuck Schumer and Al Franken are so deeply politicizing this, when a decent human like Joe Lieberman, who, by the way, helped co-found the No Labels organization, that's how deeply independent he is. He doesn't consider himself a Democrat or a Republican anymore, who is of sound moral character, which that should really trump politics at this point. And it was so surprising to me how vilified he became. And I don't know you, Mo, but please don't sit here and act like if Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders had been nominated to be the head of the FBI, Democrats wouldn't be applauding in the street. Everything is political. The fact that they came after Joe Lieberman so hard was innately political, and I don't know what's ever going to satisfy Democrats
I can tell you,
at all.
I would have been against Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren.
Well, your party didn't like Bernie Sanders. Look what they did to him.
But if it had been anyone who had served as a political figure, we are in a place right now where it is. I think there are a lot of people who come from the ranks of law enforcement who are career prosecutors, career law enforcement officials who can step into that role.
Okay, but so you're not stating any specific names. Right. But the concern right now, Trish, is that Democrats are going to step in the way of just about any decision that is made by this administration.
Right, because they just want to resist. But the one thing that, you know, I agree with you. I think Joe Lieberman is a fantastic guy, and he's proven that he can work with both sides historically. But the one issue that I think that nobody's bringing up, but is really kind of a conflict of interest, is that Joe Lieberman is a partner in the law firm with the guy who's representing Trump personally. So Trump's lawyer, you know, basically has Lieberman on the payroll. So to me, that's far more of an issue. I'd like to think Joe Lieberman can rise above that, et cetera, and I think he could. The problem is perception, right? This perception of having a conflict. And so the Democrats aren't hitting him on that. They're hitting him on all this other stuff.
They're not going to hit him on the facts. They're going to go after the emotional politics.
Democrats have talked about that too. Let's be clear. Democrats have talked about that too, and I do think that is a serious, you know, point. And Democrats didn't do that.
But so wait, Mo, before we go, would you have a problem with Andrew McCabe becoming the head of the...
Look, I'm not going to judge the actual career people, right?
Mike Rogers, Fran Townsend.
Anyone who has been
No, but is Fran Townsend automatically not allowed to become this because she had experience in the Bush administration, by the way, trying to keep this country safe from terrorists? Like, that's automatically off the table. This is the hypocrisy in it. DNC Chairman Tom Perez's recent profanity-laced speeches may not be enough to fire up the base as Democrats struggle to unite ahead of next year's midterms. The party facing a split between its establishment and many Bernie Sanders supporters who feel the party's been co-opted, and the Democrats' fundraising appears to reflect that. The DNC raising just $4.7 million last month, less than half of the $9.6 million raised by the RNC. And filings also show Democrats had just under $9 million on hand in April, compared to Republican stash of more than $41 million. The GOP says they have President Trump to thank. RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel saying, quote, "These numbers are evidence of the overwhelming enthusiasm for President Trump and the tireless work by Republicans everywhere to ensure we work together to build on our majorities and elect Republicans up and down the ballot headed to 2017, 2018, and beyond." Well, I will start with you, Mo. You used to work for the DNC. Yeah. Would this be concerning for you if you were still working there? The lack of fundraising.
It is traditionally, typically, historically, the party that's in the White House does better at fundraising than the party that's out of power. That isn't always the case, but typically, and it makes sense at the beginning of the Trump administration that his supporters would be a little bit more energizing, giving a little bit more. Remember, the DNC was in really, really bad shape heading into and coming out of this election. It had been decimated, and I'm not just talking about the WikiLeaks stuff, right?
What about the scandals? Like, you know, the push against Bernie Sanders, and then
which I think
Wasserman Schultz gets replaced.
I think some of that was overblown, some of it was not. But here's
and then she gets replaced.
But there was a much bigger challenge at the DNC, and that was the infrastructure there had been decimated. There was no field program.
Okay, fine. So let's look at Tom Perez,
now, Tom Perez and the new leadership has to turn that around.
How's he doing?
Right? I think he is beginning the stuff that's not in the news, right? Not the rallies, the profanity-laced.
Yeah.
I mean, I could do without that. I'm not the target.
I'm fine with
audience
it.
On that.
Who is the target?
But he's firing up the base. I think he can do that without. But that's so unimportant in the grand scheme of what his job is as DNC chair. His job is to build an infrastructure that can help Democratic candidates up and down the ticket, just as Ronna McDaniel's job is at the RNC.
Can I ask you a question, though? Dave Ignatius has an article in the Post today that's talking about how this upcoming midterm election for Democrats is the impeachment election, meaning that the only way he's sort of going to Democrats are going to rabble-rouse their base is by bringing up the fact that they're going to try and impeach President Trump no matter what happens, even if he has committed any crime or not. This is all just about impeachment. Do you agree with him?
No, I don't agree with that at all. And I think people that are immediately rushing to impeachment at this point are missing huge opportunities. I say this as a Democrat.
Have you talked to Maxine Waters? Did you call her and let her know you feel that way?
No, I don't have her in my speed dial. But look,
you might want to tell her.
The president is giving Democrats a lot of gifts right now, politically, right? The scandals around him are one. He's putting out their policies that I think are going to
Okay, but fine, but is that still your message? Because we sit and talk on this couch often about what the messaging is coming from the Democratic Party right now. What is it? What is the message?
I hope it's not, and this is the second part. This is where I am critical of my party. I don't always think we do a good job of saying what we are for. We're very good right now talking about what we're against. Now, again, that's not unique to Democrats. That was the Republican message in 2010
guys just lost, so you need
and
to freshen up the
2014. They were just anti-Obama, right? So it might be okay.
But see, this is why Trump succeeded, right? Because he stood for something, and he actually was able to get a lot of Democrats, blue-collar Democrats, that Hillary Clinton should have had locked up.
And the party needs to get back to talking to those people.
As either elitist in terms of her or socialist in terms of Bernie Sanders. So what is it? How do you go back to that middle class base?
I always say to my Democratic friends, it's kind of like the Republican message on Obamacare. We need to have repeal and replace. It's okay to be anti-Trump. Right? That's part of the Democratic Party's message. It is to be anti-Trump, but it has to, what are we going to replace him with? And I don't think we have articulated that as clearly as it's there.
Well, what are you for? I mean, you said it yourself. You're not saying
we're not articulating it.
I hope it's Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders so we have a blowout in 2020.
It's not about a person.
We have to move on, though. Former President Obama making a high-profile appearance in Germany at the same time that President Trump is in Europe. Mr. Obama speaking with German Chancellor Angela Merkel during an event in Berlin. While he didn't mention President Trump by name, some of his remarks appear to be a veiled swipe at his successor's policies, including the push to repeal Obamacare. Watch.
My hope was that I was able to get 100% of people health care while I was president. We didn't quite achieve that, but we were able to get 20 million people health care who didn't have it before. Obviously, some of the progress that we made is now imperiled because there's still a significant debate taking place in the United States.
Obama also talked immigration and providing aid to those in other countries. Watch.
In the eyes of God, a child on the other side of the border is no less worthy of love and compassion than my own child. In this new world that we live in, we can't isolate ourselves. We can't hide behind a wall.
Hi, Mo. I want to play a little game of devil's advocate with you. Pretend that when Obama was first elected president, President Bush was over in Europe at the same time that President Obama had made his first trip, taking veiled hits at his policies. How would you have reacted?
Yeah, I wouldn't have loved that, right? But President Obama is doing exactly what he said he was going to do when he left. He said he was going to speak out when he felt like his, our shared values, the values that he was pushing for, were under assault. And so I don't think anyone should be surprised that he's saying what he's saying, because it's what he said he was going to do.
Is it appropriate, though? I mean, again, it's so young into President Trump's administration. I don't love it, obviously.
Well, typically you don't have members of Congress who would ever do this, and it's not like it's a law or anything. It's just it's protocol, it's traditional, and in the last sitting president, it's distasteful, is what it is.
Look, I don't know that I would agree that you don't typically have members of Congress or other people doing this. I mean, we did see Republican members of Congress constantly trying to undermine President Obama, both here and overseas, with some of their trips and some of their conversations. And look, I will, there's no love lost between Presidents Obama and President Trump. Remember, President Trump spent 5 years questioning the legitimacy of President Obama and his birthplace. So
He wasn't president,
I think
though.
it reflects that, but that does not mean that it was, that it was any better, right? I mean,
but show some class. I mean, you were president of the United States, for goodness sakes, and now there's a new president, and he's working hard to do what he can to secure this country, and you're up there saying, this is not what we need, this is not the direction we should go in. Well, guess what? Your direction did not work. We have ISIS, thanks to the direction of President Obama.
I don't think you can blame President Obama for the creation of ISIS. I'm going to vehemently disagree with that. I don't think that is a fair assessment, and I think this president took strong steps to go after terrorism.
No, I think it's pretty fair to say that the isolationist policies that we pursued for the last 8 years were not the policies we should have pursued. I think that, yes, we were very isolationist. This idea that somehow the world could take care of itself was a departure from what we previously, historically, had always been. And at the time, given what we had gone through with Iraq, a lot of people felt like, okay, maybe that is the right thing to do. What we have realized is it wasn't. It simply wasn't. And President Obama is sticking to that old ideology.
Would you at least concede that a lot less children would have been gassed in Syria had we not been isolationist?
I'm as critical of the Syria policy as I think a lot of people are. I think that was probably my one big regret of the Obama years was the way we handled Syria. But I don't think I would call the United States isolationist during the Obama years. I think the United States was very engaged.
The idea was we're not going to control the world. We're not going to be, we completely backtracked from what we always had been.
Saying we're not going to control the world does not mean we're isolationist. The United States.
But Mo, it would have been nice to have the former president simply say, I want the best for America, I want the best for this president, and have that moment where he shows that class.